hospitality and technology together. I'm your host, Michael Woodson, and I'm thrilled to have you with us once again. And tonight we are on it. Believe it or not, I wish I can get a clap, but to welcome an incredible leader in the hospitality and food industry, Mr. Mark Kelnhofer. He is a certified food and beverage executive. He also has a certified technology, and he'll keep me honest, a CTA, and of course his MBA. Mark is the president and CEO of Return on Ingredients, LLC, a highly respected consultant firm that helps businesses improve their bottom line through operational auditing, receipt costing, and menu engineering. With over 25 years of of experience rather, expanding manufacturing, restaurants, and hospitality, he has helped organizations from Bravo Brio to fast casual brands save millions and millions of dollars through smart, data-driven decision making. He's also a lecturer at Ohio State University and also Georgetown University. He's recognized as one of the top 100 food and beverage leaders and named an industry thought leader by the National Restaurant uh, Association. Tonight, Mark will be sharing some of his insights. Believe it or not, I'm so excited about this on the receipt costing, the recipe costing, menu engineering, and operational audits, the ROI approach. And this session is going to be absolutely a great one. So don't want to miss this one. And it's really going to educate you. So if you join us live on YouTube, I welcome you. And for those that later on that will join us in the other social networks, LinkedIn and Facebook, we look forward to hearing your feedback. So please drop any questions you may have in the chat. Take some notes and get ready to elevate your understanding of the profitability in the hospitality operations. Let's keep building the bridge between hospitality and technology together. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to a great session here.
All right, great. So you're in this industry, and as I alluded to you when we were off camera, and I just want you to know that every time I go to a restaurant, I am just taken back of the knowledge a little that you gave me. I look at a menu differently. How did you get into this industry?
So, when I left college, I was actually a managerial cost accountant, and my first jobs were in manufacturing. So I
Hmm.
wasn't in the hospitality space at all. And I probably spent maybe 10 years in manufacturing. And then I got a call one day from a previous CFO that I worked for in manufacturing. He was he was the CFO for Bravo Brio, a restaurant company. So he had me come in, and what I found out quite quickly is that restaurants really do not know the cost of their product. And in so many cases, I don't want to say it's guessing, but they sure are hoping that the price is going to cover all their costs. And it's even beyond that. I mean, just, the size of the menus, the documentation behind the menu. What I was used to seeing in manufacturing was a lot of detail. And I didn't see that detail when I went to Bravo Brio. So I started treating them like manufacturers because technically they are, right? They're buying these raw ingredients, they're modifying the ingredients. They now have a production process, and then they're selling the finished goods. So it's no different. I mean, it is manufacturing. It's that most operators don't think of themselves that way, and they also don't really think of cost in the same way as manufacturers would either. So when I did that at Bravo Brio, I ended up saving, their cost line. It went down 5 years in a row, and it was millions of dollars in savings. So I knew that this approach, this more detailed approach, worked. So, I think that's how I got into it, starting with hospitality. Is I saw that there's a huge need, first of all, and I ended up creating Return on Ingredients in 2009.
And that was going to be my question. What motivated you to launch on return on ingredients,
Well, I
and
think
what the problem
it had to
you
be
were.
is when I went and interviewed operators. I kept hearing the same story over and over again. Meaning, they first of all they don't like costing. Nobody
Mhm.
likes it, right? Well, I like it, but I mean, most operators don't like to do it. It takes a lot of time initially to set it up, and uh, I think that because of that, that's why sometimes they don't do a very good job at it. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you're talking about analysis and decision making and menu development, if you don't have good data built, you're not going to have a good tool to make good decisions. But I always put it this way: it's really easy to make a bad mistake, right? And so,
Interesting.
yeah, every time I would go out and talk to operators, I would hear the same story. And on top of that, I'm sure that everybody has heard about the restaurant failure rate. It's huge, right? There's restaurants failing all the time. And I think a lot of it has to do with their approach to cost and setting the proper price.
And do you see a lot of we've lost a lot of chains of lately, big ones all of a
Oh, yeah.
sudden, getting out of the marketplace. So, from that, from what we're seeing, from your experience, what are the most overlooked factors in hospitality profitability that
I,
you've
I,
come
I,
across?
I go back to this is how I approach it with my students because they're learning, right? So I'd say, look, when you look at a menu, what is it? Of course, they'll have
Mm,
the standard things. They'll say, well, that's the product, and that's how we generate revenue. But it's bigger than that. The menu is everything you're all about. I mean, everything. Okay, so if you think of it that way, one, we have to make sure it's executable. But the other piece of this is that we have to go all the way back to the source document, which is the recipes. And
mm,
I can't even, I could tell you nightmare stories about this, right? When I go into certain restaurants, the documentation's not done very well at all. We find out that, in fact, I've had chefs tell me this. They say, well, they don't really tell us how to write a recipe in culinary school. And what they mean
mm,
by that is how to write a recipe for a business, because it's very different than writing a recipe for a cookbook, right? Certainly, they know how to write a recipe for a cookbook. But when you start looking at all the data that we want to have to create standards around, whether it's ingredients, grades, densities, portion controls, prep time, cook time, there's food safety, there's all kinds of parts and pieces of this documentation that a lot of times gets ignored, right? And when I had a client last week, I went in and I really took a look at their recipes. I said, well, you probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of the menu documented. Well, right away, we know right away that there's no way they know their proper cost, right? And
mm.
certainly they're not looking at data that can really drive costs down or creating these standards to gauge performance. So the recipe document, I say the menu is everything, but ultimately it's tied to that recipe documentation. And I think that is the place that has the most improvement to go on.
So it's not a guessing game. So with that said, and want to make
So
sure that we can
I
hear
even
each
said,
other.
I said, do you want to be methodical and know you're making profit, or do you want to just guess at the price and hope that you make it, right? And
Well,
when you start looking at restaurant percentages, you know, net profit, net income percentages can be incredibly low, right? So I looked at a company this past week for my class at Ohio State, and we looked at the bottom line, and it was 1.5%, right? And I said, do you know how easy it is to lose 1.5%? It's incredibly easy, right? And so we have to have processes, systems, things in place to help us react to all these quick moving cost increases, right? That we're seeing.
so what are some of the steps they take, the foundational steps in building an accurate recipe costing system?
Yes,
And
the first,
you know,
this
for someone like me,
to the
you know, I,
audit piece, but the documentation cannot be generic. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. This happens all the time, right? So I'll get a recipe from a chef, and it might say 2 ounces tomatoes, right? And I would then question him because I know based on what he's buying more than one type of tomato, right? So he's got in the back, Roma tomatoes, 6x6. He's got all these different varieties of tomatoes in his cooler, but on the recipe it says tomatoes. Well, which one is he talking about, right? And so We want to write the recipe in the detail it takes so that if anybody picks it up, they can execute it, right? There should be no guesswork. I mean, if somebody new picked that up and read tomatoes, they would not even know which variety to get. So, grades are important, sizing, the documentation has to have all the details in there. And even sometimes chefs want particular brands. In that case, you even want the brand listed on the ingredient line too. So the documentation I see a lot of times is generically written like that. You have generic terms for ingredients, which we should never have a generic term for an ingredient. I mean, the variety of ingredients we have to pick and choose from today it's incredible, right? So I think the starting point is the recipe documentation. The second thing is we want to make sure the recipe actually matches what's going on literally during the operation. So if we write the recipe, we got to validate the yields, validate the time, everything around that recipe should be validated during that audit piece to make sure the documentation is correct. Right, that's the way you validate the accuracy of it is taking the recipe and getting right there in the heat of the moment and making it and making sure that it's an attainable standard.
Interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like the economics of this is really it's sophisticated, but based on a bunch of formulas. So with that said, that costing, the recipe costing, how does that directly go into what the ROI, the return on investment for a restaurant or a
Right.
hotel or
So
F&B outlet?
yeah. So when we start talking about the size of the menu, I like to get it as small as I can. But even if you really not only counted the menu items, but if you actually look and counted the number of products you have to buy to support that menu, you might be surprised at the quantity. I've seen restaurants that, would have on the food side 150 items that they're buying just to support the menu, which means there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of process, right? So on the vendor side of the house, when we talk about those ingredients, we want to try to cross utilize products as much as possible. But remember, we have to manage cost in every one of those line items too. So when we're talking about weekly cost being updated, I guarantee you, every single week there's costs
Hmm.
changing constantly, right? So it makes it a little difficult to manage. And so that's one of the reasons that we're going to talk about technology too. There's some great technology resources out there.
Right.
Can you do it through Excel? We'll talk about that later too. And it's a different type of tool, right? But it's
Hmm.
not as sophisticated as software is. So the the um, the cost has to be updated constantly and looked at it constantly. So I would say in the past, what we would see would be quarterly menu changes, right? And every
Hmm.
quarter we would go and we'll say, well, we have to roll out a new menu for spring. We have to work towards engineering products. I think those days are gone. I think we are now engineering menus constantly, meaning we have to react to these high cost pressures and we can't wait for the next menu to roll out. We
Hmm.
have to react quicker than ever. The speed of business is like this now, right? And if you don't have the mechanism or tools in place to react, you're going to find out that over time it's going to be very difficult to make some money.
Well, one of the things it's funny you mentioned that, and we'll get to technology in a minute. But wouldn't that hurt a business? For because they can't predict, and so forth. But there's two sides of the coin. Not only from the business, but for the customer coming in the door.
Right.
So I go to a restaurant because of a burger. There's a certain type of burger that I like.
Right.
What
Well,
if I came in on Monday and they told me, well, we don't have that, but maybe next week if you come back, we'll have it. That's not necessarily good for business.
yeah. Yeah. And I also think that,
Mm.
I think I've talked about this before, or maybe we have, but there's two sides of the brain, right? So we definitely have the side where we're creating the menu items, and we have a lot of passion and emotion around those items that we create. So we're looking at flavor, we're looking at presentation, and there's a lot of things we love about the dish, which we should, and it's important. The quality of the product
Hmm.
is important, but there's also numbers to everything we do. So we want to make sure that we have both sides of the brain reacting to that product because you can make a
Right.
bad decision just off of one side of the brain. right? So you can make a bad, I've seen this a lot, right? I don't want to take that item off because I love everything about it, or it's so and so's favorite dish, right? Well, that's making a decision only on the passion and emotion you have for that menu item. Or the other way around, I've seen this too, where you just react based on numbers. The numbers aren't always everything, but you can react in a bad way, especially when it comes to price, right? You know, I used to have this CFO a long time ago that his first reaction all the time, I want to raise price to take care of the cost issues. And I go, well, you can't always do that. Right? The guest
Right.
experience, they see those price increases. It's very visible, and they know when it happens. And I think there's limits on what you can do on price. And in fact, to the point where I've seen concepts take so much price that they're almost outside of the concept that they want to be in. Like from fast casual, where the price has gone up so far that now you're close to a fine dining price point. So I think
Right.
you know you have to use both sides. You have to use both sides, and they're both important.
So, in terms of price versus, say, for example, on some menus you see the MKT market. Like for example, today's menu, it said steak, but it says market. I only used to see that for seafood, but
Yeah,
now I'm seeing it for
for
steak
more items. Yeah,
and
because the
meats and
shift.
more items. So the
Yeah, so
shift,
like you know, beef is one of those certainly that's gone up. And again, one of the things I use a couple tools, but there's Food Business News is a great publication out there that shows the prediction on where costs are going to go with certain ingredients. And so if you have that as a tool, you can kind of have a forecast, so to speak, on where your products are going to go. And if it's something that's important as beef or seafood, you're going to want to know that. And um, putting in market definitely is something where it creates a safety net for the operator, right? We can charge what we need to charge. Now, um, do people like seeing that? I would think not in every case, but they probably do understand it. I think the expansion of it is, we're going to see it, and I don't know if guests like to see that or not. My guess is that they prefer not to see it. They want to know the price up front when they're,
exactly.
yeah,
I don't. I'm used to seeing it for seafood, but today for the first time, I saw MKT next to beef, and unlike any, I've never seen that in any restaurant globally.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I've seen the fixed cost always for that, for the beef. So interesting that
yeah,
this is happening.
for sure.
So you mentioned earlier, and this gets into inventory management software. So what does technology play, in automating and in refining the recipe
Yeah. So,
costing? Where does
so
that come?
here's my 2 cents worth, right? And the first of all, when I go into certain operators, sometimes they do what I call MBE. They're trying to manage with Excel, right? Manage by Excel.
Hmm.
And they do that because Excel is cheap, right? So they attempt to do recipe costing and inventories, all kinds of things through Excel, but it's ungodly labor intense, right? It takes a long time to create all the formulas and do. And for smaller companies, maybe that works, right? But in the recipe costing side of the house, there's a lot of different technology out there. There's probably, I would say, upwards towards 30 different purveyors that can actually provide software that can do recipe costing, manual engineering, inventory management, all of it. But you have to be careful with that decision, right? Because none of those systems are very cheap. They're usually
Hmm.
subscription services, but you have to make sure that it's compatible with your existing accounting systems, one, and it also has to be compatible with the point of sale system. So you have to be really careful about vetting these systems. And the last thing you want to do is to purchase a system and all of a sudden you find out that maybe it's not compatible, or maybe it doesn't give you the proper tools you thought you were going to see, the reporting, everything that's related to the data that you're seeing. So I tell my clients, when they vet, I'm doing this now for a company here in Columbus. We're vetting systems.
Mm,
You have to go at least through 3 different demos of the software before you ever start making decisions on it.
interesting. Interesting. I guess not all tools fit all. And you mentioned Excel repeatedly. That's a static type of, and the data could change within hours. So it's not up to date data. It's difficult to
Well, the
change it.
trick
Correct.
becomes you have to structure it in a way so that you can update costs quickly, right? So
Hmm.
that's why it's so labor intense to make all these connections. So ideally, when cost update, if you entered in a spreadsheet on a vendor, that it automatically flows into every single
Hmm.
recipe that you have, and also goes over to the physical inventory piece too. So it's there's a lot of work, even in Excel, to really execute this.
Are there any other tools or platforms that you recommend for the recipe
Yeah, there's a
standardization?
handful that we're seeing that are used quite a bit. The first would be Restaurant 365 is a popular one that a lot of people
Mm.
have. The thing about that is that Restaurant 365 is also an accounting system, so it's a little different in that regard. There is some other ones called Margin Edge, Market Man I've seen, and
Mm.
Craftable. Those are all different types of software that are out there where I have clients using that for specifically for recipe costing, inventory management, theoreticals, benchmarking, all of that.
But of course, there'd be a difference between if you're a multi-location versus a mom and pop, just
Right. Yeah,
single
for sure.
location. Right? So that would make a difference too, whether you want to invest in a distributed type of platform to use across the
I
entire.
have some mom and pops where we've done everything through Excel because it's one location, maybe 2 locations. They're not quite yet ready to put the investment in technology, even though I think they should because they're growing, right? They should go ahead and start thinking about those tools because at some point we're going to want to be able to manage not just 2 stores, maybe it's 5, 7, 9, whatever. And the growth is going to continue. And we really need to get off the Excel program and get it
Mhm.
formally into another system.
Well, I'm not a fan of Excel on anything that everyone's been doing. I like you. I do teach as well, and I just said I think that Excel has it's needed to be retired, and it has been it's they're using it for what it was intended to be, and some people with pivot systems and formulas, etc., are using it. I mean, I've seen some very sophisticated spreadsheets that just like you have to sit here and like, what, and this means what to me. So, so with that said, cloud-based systems, improving the accuracy and the scalability of the recipe costing across multiple locations. What do you think? Do you
They're
think
all
that
cloud based. I mean,
good?
all those software programs I just listed off to you. And in fact, if you look at any of them, there's, like I said, I bet if we look at the 30 potential competitors out there in the space, all 30 are going to be cloud based. I don't think there's any more server based systems there, and you want it to be cloud based.
Right. So,
Anyway. So I think the cloud based solutions, they're all out there now. I don't think anymore. Yeah, I'll be very surprised if we find anybody that's doing it server based.
and that's good because that's static. But in terms of the cost that you're seeing on subscription services, for whether it be a small multi-location or around in different states, someone in one of the chains, do you
Right.
think it's affordable? Do you think the cost is appropriate, or
There
the
are
cost needs to?
some platforms out there that I would say their monthly subscription amount may not work for a smaller mom and pop place,
Mm.
whether it's 2 locations, 3 locations. It's a smaller operation, but the cost in some cases I think are high. So that when the smaller operations looking at those costs, it's a tough decision for them to do that. And I think that when you get to be a chain, it's a completely different story. Now you have, cash and you build over time, you've grown the company into 30, 40 stores. It's a completely different scenario. So I think there are some software, and again, you have to vet them. And part of vetting is what's the cost, right?
Right.
Yes, it's about vetting what it can do, and more importantly, what it can't do, right?
Right.
And then after when you're done with those 3 or 4 demos, then you start talking about what the cost. And the cost is something that's where they may say, we got to look at something else, right?
Well, and the costs will tell you if you're a company, OpEx versus CapEx, and sometimes capitalizing things. In some businesses they like that model, but that model's gone away. So we're into that OpEx type of model, and sometimes that may not work because of cash flow. Are you seeing some people struggling with that?
Well, cash is everything, right? So so then that's one of the reasons when we do manual engineering, we're looking at developing total costs for the recipe. So
Mm-hmm.
historically, restaurants look at recipes and they attempt to do their ingredients, on a recipe to cost it out, but they're not very good at it, right? They don't account for all the densities, yields, weights, measures. But beyond that, we technically should be calculating labor cost on a recipe. We should be calculating overhead costs on a recipe, just like a manufacturer would. And the piece that's usually missing is the prep time. The prep time is the labor standard on every single recipe. And I had that new client I'm telling you last week, they had no prep times in any recipe. None.
Wow.
Which means they don't have any standards or costs built around that. And unfortunately, labor has shifted into the number one spot for cost. It used to be ingredients, then labor second, overhead next. It's flipped, right? So this labor piece is incredibly important. And if I go in and there's no prep times on it, well, one of the things we have to do is create those labor standards and have to be attainable. So we'll take a stopwatch in, right? We'll literally calculate how much time it takes to execute the recipe.
Is
So
there a mean number that what determines what that prep time should be? Is it
yeah, it
variable?
depends on
What's
the
the
product.
dependency?
So I'll give you an example. So let's pretend we're making lasagna and we're making the trays of lasagna. And I'm calculating the amount of time they're prepping all the different lasagnas. But as soon as it goes into the oven, that's cook time, right? Their hands
Mm.
are no longer on the product. It's sitting in the oven for that 45 minutes, comes back out. It's all about the hands and direct labor spent to prepare the product. So we have to make sure that one, it's accurate. Two, it's attainable, right? Because we want to make sure that we're not setting the standard on a corporate chef or an executive chef, but we are setting standards with the prep cooks in the back who are executing the recipes. That's an
Yeah.
incredible difference, right? The skill sets may not, obviously, are not going to be the same. So we have to make sure
Right.
we create that labor standard. It's really something that's going back to the audit. We're really going back to the very people that are producing the product to create those standards. Now,
Wow.
here, have you ever heard of this statement? We've never done it this way.
Of
Right?
course.
I hear it all the time. It's like, well, we should calculate labor on a restaurant. Well, we never done it that way. And well, maybe we
Wow.
should be doing it, right? Because the failure rate's so high and labor costs has gone up dramatically, right? So,
Huge amount.
I
Yes.
hear it all the time. But and if you really think, how difficult is it really to set the standard of labor on a recipe? It's
Yeah.
not very difficult, is it?
Well, well, it's a fixed depending on by state, of course, right? And you have a lot of variables that go into. So, for example, you have a union shop that might have some impact, right?
Yeah. Or even this, how about this? Let's say you want to schedule your prep cooks in the back. Would not the labor time on the recipes assist with the scheduling of the prep cooks?
Mm.
What? I mean, it tightens up your ability to schedule properly. It gives you another tool because we have another piece of data, right? So I had a client in California that had, I would say, close to about 200 prep recipes. There's a lot of documentation, no prep time,
Mm.
no
Wow.
prep times. Even worse, no yields. The
Wow.
yield of the recipe is the end result of the ingredients, no yields. So
So
they,
over time, that could fail to a high
yeah,
rate of
we
failure.
start talking about cost and being able to identify it. It was impossible at that point in time because we don't
Wow.
have a lot of parts and pieces.
Wow. Well, let's get on to some another question. You mentioned earlier, about technology and the important piece, and we talked about that. But what are the most common technology-related mistakes that you see in the
All
food
right,
cost thinking,
a couple.
and how can it be avoided? How can they avoid that?
Well, there's ways to do it. So here's one. I'll give you an example of a mistake, or what I don't particularly like about some software is that let's take a product we're buying from a vendor where we know when we process that product that not all of it is usable, right? So that's where yields come into place, right? Well, sometimes technology in the background, you can load in a yield percentage, right? Does it work for costing? Yeah, but it's hidden to the user, right? The store operator,
Mm,
it's hidden. So instead of hiding it, what I do is I document it. So anytime there's a process, there's a recipe written, no matter how simple. So I'll give you an example. Let's pretend that we're buying yellow bananas, right? We got a case of 40 pounds yellow bananas, and one of the recipes I have documented is peeled bananas, right? So the chef is going to tell me, we don't need a recipe to peel bananas. I go, behold it. We do, for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you peel the bananas, what's going on with the peel? What's happening? Getting tossed, right? So automatically,
mm,
cost per ounce of that peeled banana goes up, right? Because we have some of the product that we just bought, we're tossing in the can, right? The waste basket. So we now have an increase in cost per ounce. And the other reason why is that it didn't just get peeled on its own, did it? No, you had somebody had to process it, right? So if you
right.
start thinking about all the processes that happen, chop, dice, julienne, blanch, cook, trim, you can go on, right? In most cases, you're going to have losses of product, and then we actually want to calculate labor standards for all of that. And it's rare that you gain in product, right? So
Mm,
an example where you gain in product or weight is dry pasta. When you get dry pasta, it's very light, right? But then you put it into the water, maybe put some oil in. What happens when it cooks up? It absorbs the water and the oil, so now it weighs more, right? So the yield in that case, you actually gain from, let's say you start with a pound and now you got 2 pounds, right? Because it's
right.
pasta. So what biggest thing that I see, it's garbage in, garbage out. And if you're not placing every single process and recipe in the system, your costs are going to be understated. And if your costs are understated, guess what? Your profit that you thought you were going to have is overstated, right? So
Mm.
there are good systems out there. I think I'm throwing some caution here saying that when you have a system, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you're not methodically writing every single process, you're not going to get the results that you want at the end when we talk about profitability.
So in doing that now, and given what's going on with the fluctuation of prices, we've got our tariffs coming in, we've got ingredients that are imported, whether it be from Brazil, Mexico, etc. Before you did it, probably how often did you do the exercise? What, once a month?
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. Every week, so
Every
ideally
week now?
these systems have a lot of times electronic invoice capability where they're coming in automatically, so you're not hand keying a cost to update it. It's coming in, and when you process it, costs are being updated constantly. So, but I look at performance, whether it's performance on ingredients, performance on labor, performance on overhead. I look at it every single week to see if there's anything I need to react to, because there might be, right? And when we start talking about theoreticals and cost, actual versus theoretical and variances, we want to know what's causing us issues, right? Those variances come up, and we want to find out, well, do we have an efficiency issue, or is there something causing that inefficiency where we have to react to it? It could be maybe we had an issue with the piece of equipment. That's why we didn't perform
Mm.
really well this week. It could be a very valid reason, or it could be we think there's a theft issue, right? Unfortunately, theft is huge in our business, right? So
Yeah, the
it's
shrinkage.
just you
Yes.
need these tools in place to start reacting, whatever it might be, right? And when we react quicker, like I said, you can't wait 3 months until the next time the menu is going to be rolled out to react to these issues. every week you should be reacting. And these software tools allow us to update those costs very quickly.
There's an interesting business, if I may say. Hey, well, with artificial intelligence, what's your take on that one? Machine learning technologies. We know that
Or even robotics, right?
right,
Robotics is
right,
another one.
and
Yeah.
and robotics, right. But with this said, though, in terms of AI and machine learning improving waste reduction through
Right.
better recipe costing.
Well, here's what I'm seeing. So I've had other instructors I work with that say, "Oh, we can use AI to create a recipe." I go, "Great." The answer is yes, you could, right?
Hmm.
And you can go out and say, "Hey, create a recipe for lasagna," and it'll probably generate a recipe. But the thing it's not going to be able to do is identify all those processes that I just got done talking about, right? So they're not going to be able to write the recipe for the business, right? It's going to be like a cookbook recipe. So you have to be careful about when you use AI. I don't think you're ever going to see AI attach cost to a recipe. There's some
Hmm.
complexity there, right? And I don't know if that's something that's going to happen. Now, robotics, I've seen some pretty slick robotics out there, even on the culinary side. You might be surprised where they're very human like, right? And if it can, the issue is that if it can perform and perform well and it's efficient and it's more efficient than our traditional labor, we're going to see more and more robotics in place, right? And I think that could happen, right? Now, do I think that on the culinary side, there's never going to be a need for a culinarian? That's not true. We're always going to
Hmm.
have a culinarian for the whole menu development and all that. But we could find some robotics to help process the product, though. And I've
Hmm.
seen quite a few examples. So overseas, there's a pizza restaurant where literally everything about making the product is done by robots, all the
They're
way
flip.
from
They're
pressing the
flipping
dough
the dough.
out, putting the sauce on, putting ingredients on, putting it in the oven, getting it out of the oven, putting it in a box, cutting it, and then sending it on a conveyor belt up
Hmm.
front to the people to get.
Are they flipping the dough?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Well, there's a robot called Flippy out there in California.
Wow.
Right? I don't know if you've seen that yet, but there is
Oh,
a robot. You can Google it later, but Google Flippy the robot,
flipping the
and
robot.
it was created to flip hamburgers. So when they put the raw hamburger on the grill, it temps it, knows when to flip it. It flips it, temps it again, then moves it off the grill to the
Wow.
bun, and it cleans the grill after. Right. So,
Wow.
but Flippy now is doing other things. White Castle now is utilizing Flippy to drop fries into the basket and drop the basket down. Right. So
Wow.
you're seeing more and more automation and tools, of course, but there's an investment there, right? You
Hmm.
have an initial investment in a capital expenditure, right? There are some things you have to be aware of sometimes, like repair and maintenance, right? But I remember when they interviewed the owner of that restaurant out in California that was using Flippy. He said Flippy's great. He never calls off of work, right? He's dependable, he's efficient, less waste. And so right away up front, they're saying, hey, this is a great thing. I think we're going to see some different robots in coming up in our industry. And in fact, if anybody's going to the NRA show in Chicago next month, you're going to see I guarantee you're going to see more robotics there.
Hmm. But I've seen it even on a college campus in Bridgewater State College. A couple of weeks I was there,
Yep.
and I came to an intersection and I'm seeing these
Drones.
no, no, these robots. They're in these little carts and they're driving by. They
Yep.
stopped at the corner. I was my light, forced me to stop, and along across came a series of robotic carts that just went
Yep.
by me,
Hmm.
and they deliver food to the students
Yeah.
in the college dorm.
Yeah, they're all over Ohio State, right? So they
Wow,
have, and if you get there early enough in the morning when it's breakfast time, you'll see a whole army of them out, for delivering breakfast to all these students. So
Wow, life is good. I just, I didn't have
There's
that
even
when I was in college.
robotic food runners. I don't know if you've
Yep.
seen that, where
No, I have not.
the chef at the expo station will take the dishes, put it literally on a robotic food runner, tell the machine to go to table 10. It automatically knows where to take the food, and it takes it. The guest takes their food off the trays. The robot goes right back to the expo station.
Unbelievable. With baseball season, I wonder if those, the guy in the stands would be replaced. The person in the stand bringing you the popcorn and peanuts, etc., would going up and down the aisle would be replaced by a robot. I wonder.
Uh,
That'll take
that,
away.
going up and down the stairs.
But anyway, so let's get on to this question. So, what's the process of engineering what we call a data-driven menu?
Okay, so I
And,
do
and
what's called cost volume profit. So it's an accounting term, right?
mm-hmm,
So if you ever
mm-hmm,
take managerial cost accounting, you have cost volume profit analysis. But here's what I'm going to tell you. When if I say the word profit, that means true profit, right?
mm-hmm,
Most restaurants don't know their true profit because they don't think about labor and overhead cost. So it's really important that when you do the analysis of a menu that we really understand which items are driving profitability and cash, because that's what it's all about, right? So if we have total
mm-hmm,
cost on a menu item, now we do know that. But here's the important piece. There are going to be some that perform. Everything that's on the menu should perform and be profitable, right? There's no such thing as a loss leader. That term is, when there'll be chefs sometimes ask, well, isn't that a loss leader? I go, why are you taking a loss on anything, right? We should be making money. That's what it's all about. And there's no relationship between maybe a glass of wine and a dinner, right? They may have their glass
mm-hmm.
of wine and the experience done and they leave, right? So I make sure that we're profitable on every item. But more importantly, when you look at a menu, people look at a menu very methodically. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the eye gaze study, right? But there are
No.
places on the menu that are more profitable than others, right? So you want to make sure that we put certain sections on certain parts of the menu. But think about this. I put on the menu. Let's just create a section. Let's say it's salads, right? We have a salad section. We have 4 salads on the menu. Do you think it matters how we list those salad inside that category? Does it matter on how we list it? The answer is yes. The very first one should be the most profitable item we have. Then the second one's
Mm-hmm.
profitable, right?
Wow.
The reason why we do that is the wait staff can then, when they're asked to make a recommendation, they can immediately know. Now they don't know the numbers. So the one thing they do know is the one that's making us the most money. I know where it's located at, right? So I'm going to suggest, boom, there you go.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so
That's
wait
that's
staff
creepy.
and
That's not good.
set up the menu and how we actually have it sorted in profitability in each category. The wait staff can actually have a big role in improving profitability. Their
Wow.
suggestions can really help drive it.
So when I asked that question, so could you make a recommendation? I shouldn't be asking that question because that my price is going to go up.
Well, I didn't say price. I said profitability.
Oh, so what's the profitable item that they have, on
Exactly.
their menu? So they're
So
going to point to
you
that.
could have
Okay.
something. Now I've done this before, right? I had something that where the price was lower, but the profitability was higher, right?
Mm,
So when it's not necessarily the highest price point, it's all about how much cash and profit are we going to get when we sell this, and that's the suggestion. So there's a big difference between price and profit.
Now, on some restaurants they have our weekly special or our daily special.
Yeah. So you know what I do in this
Excuse
don't
me.
always like this, but I always say, look, we need to have some restraint, right? So I'm going to tell you that we need to standardize specials. And maybe I come up with a dozen different specials. They can run any of them they want at any point in time, but they're standardized, meaning the recipe is always going to be the same. So
Hmm.
if you do a bank
Interesting.
of specials, that's
Hmm.
great. But if you don't create those standards, you're going to have some chefs that will go off and do some really unbelievable things in terms of product and bringing in different product. And, you know, we as a company, we should make sure that we're making money even on the special, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
I've seen chefs that brought in, wait till you hear this craziness, right? For a fish special, I remember when this is going way, way back in the early days of Bravo Brew, we didn't have standards and specials. And this one chef brought in, he literally FedExed a fish from Alaska, right?
Wow.
And the amount of money he not only spent on the fish, but the amount of money that FedEx charges for that, for him to run a special. And it turns out that we weren't making money on the product. And in fact, the corporate chef would never even approve that type of product. So you do have to have some guidelines on what they can do and what they can't do. You don't, even on the bar, if we talk about the bar, if you don't limit the product offering on a bartenders, bar managers will start to expand their offering, right? And the number of labels and the number of products. So they see a new product come in, they read about it in a magazine, or maybe the rep comes in trying to sell them new liquor. It can get out of
Mm.
control quite quickly. Okay. So I had
Wow.
this is a true story. I know you're sitting down, right? So I
Yes,
had
I am. Mhm.
a bar manager at one of my clients' restaurant decided to buy an incredibly expensive bottle of bourbon. The cost of the bottle was $2,800.
Wow.
Okay. So the cost per
Wow.
ounce, a little bit more than $110 an ounce. So I said, I'm going to predict something, right? And I'm kind of a analytical, methodical person, but I'm going to say, I'm going to predict that the next time I come up there, that I'm going to see dust on that bottle, right? It's not going to turn. It's all about how we sell the product, turn the product, make money. The one thing we don't want to do is put it into something that's not going to sell. Once you put the cash in that bottle,
Mm.
it can sit for an unbelievably amount of time, and the bottle's not working for you. Everything has to generate profitability. It's got to turn, right?
Hmm. Wow. Amazing. So let's talk about POS systems, point of sale systems and customer data. You know, how does that POS system and customer data inform decisions around pricing and item placement? You talked a little bit about the salads, etc. So can
Right,
you kind
right.
of
You mean on the
elaborate
menu
on that?
point of
Yes.
sale system? Well, there's another audit point there, right? So I've seen this before too. Okay. Let's pretend that one of the salads is at 19.95 on the menu, right? You order the salad, the point of sale gets rung up, and you see on your bill that it's not 19.95, but it's 18.95, right?
Hmm.
Is the guest going to tell the business that they didn't charge them enough? Probably not, right?
No.
Right. They're not. But when you have that circumstance, there's lost revenue. So I see that, I catch it frequently where I'll say, hey, the menu shows one price, the point of sale doesn't reflect that price. That's a missing amount of revenue, which means cost percentages go up as a result. The other thing that we use point of sale for is we want to gather the quantities and guest counts. Traffic to me is an incredibly important piece of information we should be gathering, right? So if a waiter and waitress is at a table, when they at the point of sale system, they're going to put in, I have a table of 4 people, 5 people, whatever it is, right? We should be tracking that because that
Hmm.
tells us a story, whether or not traffic's going up or down. We want to know that, right? But beyond that, we want to use that data for other things. So quantities in a point of sale system help us drive menu mix reporting, theoretical cost, and it also helps when we talk about that guest count. So I'll give you some examples. Could we use the guest count to create some performance measurements? And one right off the top of my head that I've done before is I've taken my time, right? I want you to think about this. The time that the wait staff spends at a table, I can calculate cost per guest, right? Labor cost per guest on the front of the house personnel. And that piece, remember, it's a benchmark. Anytime you create a benchmark, there are those that perform and those that don't. But the whole purpose of it is to find out why we're not performing, right? So the ones that aren't performing, we want to react to. You have to have a way to be able to make some changes. So it can be cost per guest. It could be
Mm-hmm.
minutes per guest, right? We can have how much time is being spent on every guest. So we want to create these unique benchmarks. So cost, I had bread cost per guest, right? So I knew how much money we were spending on bread. I knew how many guests we served. I could calculate bread cost per guest, and I would always come up with it. And when I first did that calculation, I had bread cost at one location at like 15 cents per guest, at another location at 30, right? Double. So, and what we found out was that the wait staff did not want to keep replenishing bread. So they put a heavy amount of bread on the table at the initial serving, which may or may not have gotten used. And of course, once it's leaving, once the guest leaves, if they're not eating all that bread, they're throwing it out, right? So we got to use data on the point of sale, which is really quantities, right? Menu mix quantities. Also, we're pulling that guest count to be able to create benchmarks. And then we also have in the point on the management side, we have all the purchases through a system. Hopefully, we can
Mm-hmm.
calculate cost of goods, actual versus theoretical, but you got to have both systems working together.
So it's kind of interesting to see, managing that waste. So there's a factor into that. Never thought about down to the basics of the bread. You
I
arrive
used
at the
to have
restaurant.
a stellar seller report, right? So let's say I had
Mm-hmm.
90 stores, and I would have the best performing stores on top, right, based on variances or efficiency, right? And because cost percentages they can change depending on mix, right? But
Mm-hmm.
efficiency says something. That means how efficient are we running as a business? And I would have the best performing stores on top, and the ones on the bottom, they were in the cellar. And every month I would look at that report, and it's published. Of course, the restaurants don't want to be on the bottom, right? But they then got a visit from me because I wanted to make sure that we can make improvement. So that's the other thing I tell my students. This is not about blame, none of it, right? If we had the stellar cell report, it's about reaction, right? We want the ones on the bottom to improve. If we can
Mm.
improve their performance, now that's for the whole company's benefit. So it's
Oh,
about how we react, and it should be done in a positive way. We got to come up with a plan to make that improvement, and then we got to see if it happens.
are there any solutions out there that allow these operators of A and B and test different menus to gauge their
All
performance?
right, so
Anything to?
the same solutions that we spoke about before, you can do that. So I have right now, I have a client where we're testing a rollout of a new design menu. So we had that menu at 3 locations, but they have 18 total. So
Hmm.
testing the menu, and you can test it out as long as you segregate the test, right? Make sure you understand who's testing the menu, that we can go analyze that and see how it's working. And if we're happy with the results, that's great. Then we roll it out to the other 15. So you can do that with just about any system. You just have to make sure on the point of sale side that it's very segregated and for those particular test locations.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Technology is just taking its place within this industry very rapidly. We're coming home in 5 minutes. Actually, 6 minutes to go. We're live on, and we want to take some questions. If there's questions, if you have them, audience, please put them in the box. We will try to get to them, to that YouTube audience. And let's go on to this side right here. How about the augmented, or what we call the dynamic menus? And they're
Wow.
used in what we call these digital displays, or they give you a
Yeah.
tablet. And then does this influence profitability? Why don't you expand on
Well,
that?
it does because you can make a quick change. So I'll give you another example. I have a client now. I would never recommend doing this, right? But I have a client where they have a chalkboard menu up on the wall, right? Well, every time they make a price change in the point of sale, what do they have to do? They have to climb up the ladder, change the price on the wall, right? And it's incredibly
Mm-hmm.
labor intensive. And for me, it'd be risky, right? I may fall off the ladder, right? But when you have these digital menus, you then can make quick changes. And you remember I said a printed menu, we're looking at categories and performance, and we're putting items in a very unique order. Well, we're doing that on a digital menu too. It's no different. And it doesn't matter if it's digital or here, I'll show you something here real quick. Hold on. Say this. This is a menu, right?
Wow.
Very
Fantastic.
unique, right?
It is
So,
unique.
every item needs to be engineered for profitability. So it doesn't matter. And I remember when they had this on the table, it's one of the first things I looked at because I thought, what a unique way to show a menu, right?
It is.
But it's still, you still have to engineer for profitability. So it doesn't matter if it's a digital board, printed menu, this bottle, right? Everything
But,
has to be engineered for profitability.
but
But that,
that bottle is a static menu. You can't change it on the fly.
no,
You have to put a new sticker on it and a new menu on it
you
on a
do.
daily basis. I mean, if you switch, say, from a lunch menu to a dinner menu, obviously that bottle would not be appropriate. Correct?
Right. Well, and even there are restaurants that print their menus daily. Where
Mm.
they change the price if they need to. They can do it pretty quickly now. But on the digital side of the house, if you had a digital menu up on the wall, you can change those on the fly at any point.
Wow, interesting. Hey, we have a question in the box. It says here, and I know we talked about it, but what is the role of AI in the food industry? I know we talked a little about it. Can you expand on that for the audience?
I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that does have an impact. Right now, what I see is just you know it's not to the point where I think it's going to have a major impact yet, but who knows where it's going to go, right? So I do think that recipe documentation might change, but I think maybe also on the ingredient side of the house, maybe there's something that AI can do to notify us quicker of any type of cost increases, right? If Food Business News is a publication, does it notify us of commodity cost issues? Every 2 weeks you get the publication, you might be able to read about it. I think someday what we're going to have is we're going to have an AI may actually be able to tell us the market, right? The commodity market. Everything we buy in terms of ingredients is a commodity, and they can change. Cost can change. So I think
Yeah.
it may help us to react quicker by having that tool there, and I think it may really change the way we do menus. Period.
So, do you think, with that said, that with the learning, the LLMs, a privatized one, where your data and your everything about your business goes in factors to give you some suggestions, do you think
Yeah.
that may be a better way of managing this profitability and inventory control, etc.? Will that play a role with the help of AI?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I we're not at the point yet, but this is where I think this could go, right? So, have you ever
Mm.
heard of predictive costing?
Mm. Yes,
So
I have.
here's what I would prefer, right? And we did this kind of but manually, So the manual example I have is eggs, right? So we read about the publications, we read about the trends of what eggs cost us. We know that eggs are going to continue to go up till the end of the year or beyond, right? So it's not going to be a quick solution here in terms of the cost. And so what I did, because eggs are a very unique product, when you talk to
Mm.
a chef, what could we replace the egg with? Well, you could
Mhm.
maybe use liquid eggs or powdered eggs or powdered egg flakes, right? But if you don't want to change the quality, you almost have to stay with the egg. So what we
Mhm.
did is we actually incorporated the forecast, the predictive forecast for those eggs, the cost to be much higher by the end of the year. We would put that in the model for costing to make sure we knew what the worst case scenario was.
Well, well, great. Eggs are a touchy subject. We've come up on top of the hour. We're coming up on 6 o'clock. It's been a pleasure, Mark, being with you and learning more about what goes into a menu. And so, we want to thank you. You,
Yeah.
you, your firm.
I could
And
talk
then
all day.
Mark, and then yes, you can, and you've done a great job of educating us on the menu. Like I told you, I'm looking at a menu in a whole different way. So, to our audience, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to always coming on and educating you about technology, where technology and hospitality come together. Let's keep building the bridge between hospitality and technology together. And so, until next time, my name is Michael Woodson, and I look forward to seeing you again. And Mark, I hope to have you back. Good night,
No
and
problem.
of course, wherever you may
Anytime.
be, good day to you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks.